His face is made of darkness. It drips from him like oil. His hands are skeletal and freezing. His heart offers him no blood. When you were younger, you speculated what might run through his veins: dust, rust, ash. But now you know there is nothing inside the veins he does not have. There is only his billowy, black frame, sunken cheekbones, empty eye sockets, and a sickening grin that stretches across his face like an arrow on a bow. He is the prince of blackness and the governor of malice. There is nothing inside him that is light or gay. He is made only of misery, and misery alone. But of course, you already know that. The first incident, 1985, it was a Saturday, maybe, or a Sunday afternoon. You were very young. Your parents and your brother were out on the town, so your aunts had come to watch you. They were the twin sisters on your dad's side. Their names were Betty and Beatrice, and they were usually quite nice. They carried lollipops in their purses for you, and let you do things your parents wouldn't. But today, that was not the case. You wanted to go swimming in the river like your brother did. It was the perfect day for it. Like I said, it was a Sunday or Saturday, and it was bright. So bright that the sunlight bounced off the river rocks and sparkled in your eyes. On the warm air came butterflies and bees, which landed on colorful flowers by the riverbank. "Aunties, may I go swimming?" You brushed blonde hair from your eyes and made your best convincing face. Your aunts exchanged glances. "There are diseases in the water," they said. "No, there aren't," you replied, confused. "It's safe. William goes all the time." Both women eyed the clear blue water with nothing but contempt. Beatrice said, "You will not go." "Why?" you yelled. They gave no real reason for this injustice. That in itself was an outrage. Betty said, "That's final." She tried to pluck you from the ground, but you attached your arms around a tree and held steady. "Why? Tell me why," you demanded again. The sisters began to reprimand you, your least favorite thing ever. You tried to tune him out, but it didn't work. Their voices were like the cawing of lunatic crows, loud and incessant, and their faces were pinched like crows, too. Come to think of it, the sisters were very ugly. That was when you saw him, the man made of darkness. He was so immensely frightening that you immediately tried to run, but fear, or maybe just his shadowed arms, held you in place. You looked to your aunties for help, but miraculously, they weren't there anymore. It was only you and he. "They are ugly, aren't they?" he said in a voice that was both menacing and syrupy sweet at the same time. "Terribly so." Your voice trembled. "Who are you? Does it matter? What do you want?" "I want what you want, dear girl. And I'm going to give it to you." The man, if he could be called that, was coming closer, floating really, and you held your gaze in front of you so as not to look at him. "What are you going to do?" you whispered. He was a hair's breadth away. You could feel his thin lips against your ear as he whispered to you the worst words you'd ever heard. "No," you screamed. "You can't." "I will," the man said. "For you." Your eyes were wide in fear, and this time, when you tried to run, it worked. You could see your aunties again, but you could still see him, and when you glanced back at Betty and Beatrice you noticed that they looked just like shadows, too, as if they were real but barely so, and the edges of your vision were curling in like paper touched by a flame. Terrified, you flew into the house and your aunties followed. The terrible man stayed outside, and so with the three of you inside away from him, you locked every door in the hopes he could not come in. And then, all of a sudden, you weren't inside anymore. And the man wasn't outside, either. You realized with abject horror that the two of you had switched places. You squeezed your eyes shut and fell to the ground, arms around your knees, rocking. You told yourself that when you opened them, everything would be fine. Even as you smelled the smoke and heard the man whisper, "Hush, my dear, for I will take care of everything," even as you realized what was happening and heard screams mingling with the monster's voice. Even then, you kept your eyes shut and told yourself this. Even then, when your parents and brother came home, you felt the man's presence still. He set his bony hand on your shoulder and whispered, "I'll take care of this, too." And he did. The second incident, 1987, you began to call him the Shadow Man. You tried not to think about him, but it was hard, because when you'd feel sharp pine needles stick into your feet, or you'd have to sleep in a dank, smelly cave, or you'd think about what you'd become, a vagrant, a thief, a girl on the run, you knew it was his fault. That fateful first time you hoped would be the last. After all, that day, you'd lost everything. Some days you looked back on what had happened and asked yourself, should I really have fled? You'd grown accustomed to the question burning in the back of your mind. But then you'd stop to think about what would have happened if you hadn't. Policemen yanking on your pigtails, demanding an explanation beneath bright fluorescence that basked everyone in a harsh yellow glow. "It wasn't me," you'd exclaim, but no one cared to listen. And those that did would never believe you. You knew with absolute certainty that no one would ever believe you about the Shadow Man, and you weren't about to be incarcerated for something you didn't do. So the last time that you listened to anything he said was right after the last of your family members had perished, when the sirens came screaming in violent blues and reds. He'd said run. So you did, and 2 years later, here you were. Living in the woods, traveling miles from the crime scene every day, trying to stay out of sight. Of course, you couldn't always do this. You developed a schedule of sorts, which went as follows: on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday you were to travel via the cover of the woods. On Saturdays, you risked being seen, although you weren't entirely sure what would happen if you were, to dig around the nearest town and see what you could scrounge up. On Wednesdays, you did the same. Today was a Wednesday. So with a tug on the laces of a pair of brown ankle-length boots you'd discovered lying on someone's doorstep, you set off. The town, you discovered, was grey and dreary. It was bigger than most of the others. It could almost be considered a city. You took the back roads through it, ducking when you saw anyone, especially the middle-aged men dressed in top hats and black suits. They reminded you of him. You found meat at a butcher's shop and fabric to later be fashioned into clothes, however crude they might end up. You were going to head back after finding yourself behind an innocuous-looking flower shop, but as you turned to go, you heard the squeaky creak of a door. You couldn't help it. You turned and looked. A woman dressed in a floral shirt and jeans saw you and gasped audibly. Immediately she opened the door again and shouted, "Marcus!" into the depths of the back of the store. Standing stock still, frozen, you were reminded of what happened the last time you couldn't move. Briefly you were thrust back into the past, and then you were yanked out again as a huge, burly man held his hands out to you and whispered what you might whisper to a scared, lost dog. "Come here, I won't hurt you," he said in an accent you couldn't place. "Come on, now." You turned tail and fled. The pair chased after you for some amount of time, but because you were smaller and faster and could wedge yourself through tiny spaces, you eventually lost them. When you'd stopped running, your loot left behind and your legs sore and tired, you chanced something you never would have otherwise, a nap, without the cover of night, right there in a back alley of an old, grey town. When you awoke from the loud bong of a clock tower, the first thing you thought was ow. The second was, what's that noise? It wasn't the tower, although its loud clanging was still ringing in your ears. It was, instead, singing. You dared to edge closer to the noise. It only grew more heavenly as you approached. When you saw the iron sign reading, "Monastery," above an old-fashioned church-like building, you realized that what you were hearing were nuns. When you looked in the windows, you couldn't see anyone, so you concluded that the singing must be coming from someplace deeper. But you were drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. You didn't think there would be any harm in entering as long as no one was by the doors. Maybe it was errant thinking, your mind still groggy from sleep, but in that moment you saw no flaw. Carefully, you edged the giant doors open and slipped inside. The place was beautiful, lit with lanterns and adorned with stained glass. It was so beautiful you almost wanted to cry. And the singing was otherworldly. You got lost in that place, lost in the beauty, and decided to stay there until nightfall or until they stopped their song. Your bliss didn't last. By the time the nuns finished, the whole group making rounds together to snuff out all the lanterns, and thus entering the entrance hall where you lay, you'd been lulled almost to sleep by their melodies and were in no state to flee. By the time you recognized what was happening, multiple women surrounded you, calling for things like hot water and disinfectant. That's when he came, skeletal and sunken, looking just like before. Only this time, he had more fervor in his voice. "Hello," he said as the rest of the world blacked out, leaving only the two of you. The word sent shivers down your spine. "No," you said. "No." The shadow man draped an arm around you, leaned in close. His oily presence felt like scorpions and snakes, and it did almost sound like a hiss as he said, "Trust me." "I won't," you screamed. "Otherwise they'll capture you, my dear," he murmured in your ear. "Otherwise you'll be forced to pay for what you did." You were completely enraged. You shouted, "It wasn't me." You tried to kick him away. You screamed at him that you wouldn't listen. You put up a big fight, but in the end, it made no difference. The world came back into view again, in the same grayed-out way as the first time, just long enough for you to see the boot that you surely thought would crack the shadow man's skull collide into one of the lanterns that lit the monastery walls. You could see the nuns. They had backed away in fear. They were huddling in the corner and screamed as the fire caught. You watched the shadow man tear down the rest of the lanterns, and the flames could not be stopped. They spread instantly, just like the smile on his sickening face as he said, "Wouldn't want to leave them alive, now would we?" You watched as he took you under an arm and roughly jostled you back into the clear air outside the monastery. You watched as he barred the door. You told yourself, everything will be fine. But of course it wouldn't be. Nothing would ever be okay again. The final incident 1997 you got caught. It took a few more years for it to happen, and a few more mishaps along the way, but by the time you were 17, you couldn't run anymore. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And although you were likely thousands of miles away from where the trouble began, they caught on to the trail of destruction you caused and traced each incident all the way back to when you were a child, in 1985. You were given a trial, and things looked bleak, but eventually you got off because you were young and faced, how had they put it, mental instability. So instead of jail, you got a psychiatric ward. At first, the ward had infuriated you. Everyone there was a total psychopath, and you weren't. You knew you weren't, but the wardens told you that what you were dealing with wasn't real. They said the shadow man was a hallucination. They gave you the science behind it. They put you on meds for severe paranoid schizophrenia, your official diagnosis. You knew it was bullshit, and you had never been angrier. Over the years, countless innocents had died. And it hadn't been you. It had been him. But just as you predicted all those years ago, not a soul believed you. The weeks at the ward turned into months, and nothing changed until the fateful day that you decided to speak up. You'd gotten used to being silent at your therapy sessions. It was better than arguing, and you hated the way that the counselors and doctors looked at you, spoke to you, the way they'd ask questions like, and what made you feel that way? Or do you have any ideas of what might help in those situations? It made you want to throw up. Lately, though, as many of the other patients who'd been admitted with you got better, you began to hear a lot of talk about a specific person. You didn't know anything about him, but the name Dr. Ligari had been floating through the halls for weeks. And today, for whatever reason, was the day your curiosity bested your stubbornness. About 30 minutes into the silent session, you coughed and asked, "Who is Dr. Ligari?" Your counselor raised her eyebrows, but answered nonchalantly, "Oh, Dr. Ligari. He's essentially each patient's ticket out of here." This time, your eyebrows raised. "What?" She laughed an annoying, tittering laugh. "Oh, don't be so surprised. You have to have made progress here first. A lot of progress. In your case, as a schizophrenic, you have to have denounced your delusions and admitted that's what they are, and prove to us how you will keep from having delusions in the future. Once you've done that, we take you up to see Dr. Ligari, and if he gives the okay, you're out of here. And all I have to do is admit that my delusions are delusions. In addition to taking your meds regularly, cooperating with staff and treatment, and actually speaking in your therapy sessions, yes. So over the next long, snail-paced months, that's what you'd done. Sure. It was all fake. You didn't mean any of it, but they didn't need to know that. And you were a pretty good actress, if you said so yourself. So much so that 3 months after that initial conversation, you were being bussed to the Ligari guy to be officially discharged. Excited, your therapy counselor asked. "Yeah," you muttered. "It's okay," she said cheerfully. "I won't take it personally. Is this dude really all he's cracked up to be?" "Oh, yes, he's certified. And we hardly ever hear from the patients he's discharged once he's discharged them." You let that sink in. "And that's good." "Oh, yes," she said. "Weirdo," you thought, not for the first time. You arrived in front of a tall, white hospital building that invited people in via giant automatic doors. You, the counselor, and an assistant entered and waited, until a nurse came and told the group to follow her to the doctor. Chewing on your thumbnail, you followed through each pristine, white hallway until you came to a room that looked a little bigger than the others. You were trailing everyone, so you were the last person to see what stood before you when you entered the room. You didn't scream. You couldn't. He greeted you by name, reaching out his oily, dark hand, but you wouldn't take it. "Now, Amy," the counselor scolded. "Be a nice girl, shake his hand." What? Couldn't they see what he was? Your blood had turned to ice. "Just say it," you told yourself. "Tell them it's him. It's him," you stuttered. The counselor frowned. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." The assistant said, "Dr. Ligari is a nice, normal man. He's a doctor, like us." "That's no doctor," you growled. "Of course he is. See his lab coat." That's when you realized that no one else could see what you saw. No one else saw the dripping black skin, the smile stretched impossibly thin, the skeletal hands. No one knew what he was. "Come now, Amy," whispered the shadow man. "I won't hurt you. In fact, I'm here to help." You felt yourself being pushed towards him. "Come now," he repeated. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm going to make it so that all the bad things go away. So that you can make them go away, yourself." Then, everything went dark.